the session so that we can all have it for future. And anyone is also welcome to record the session as you want. So this is being presented to you by Arora Online, and we are a new digital agency, and we're very excited that you could all join us today. So this quote from Charles Dickens really sums up the mood of our current era. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity, it was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. So I've chosen to start off with this quote because I think we all know that we are living in this really disruptive era, and it feels incredibly harsh with COVID and people like Trump in power, and the future of work really being an uncertain, creating a lot of uncertainty for a lot of us. So it's a scary environment, much like the French Revolution that Dickens was referring to, with huge amounts of change that are obviously going to change our lives forever. But this moment of the fourth industrial revolution also really presents a lot of opportunity. It's a democratizing moment. And with COVID accelerating that, as harsh as it seems, it is moving us forward. So businesses, as we all know, have been forced to focus on their digital transformation. And although a lot of us have been forced to do that, there really is a light of opportunity in all of this to diversify and become much more robust as businesses. So who am I, and why do I care about this topic? So I'm Steve. I'm at my core a social scientist, although I do find myself now in marketing. I find digital transformation, because of the way it affects, it's just really this interface between industry and society. So I do find the more that I delve into digital transformation and deal with it, it does require a social science kind of view. So that's why I mention that. I'm one of the founders and directors of Arora Online, and I am the strategist on the team. In my personal capacity, I've worked on some big brands, including Mazda, Ackermans, Takealot, Heineken, KWV. My special area, or my passion area, is theatre and art. So I work with Cape Town City Ballet, the Waterfront Theatre School, and Darkroom Contemporary. So if you do sense a little bit of a bias in the presentation towards theatre and the arts, it's just because that's where my passion lies. And that was my previous industry before marketing. And it's also surprising that, given that as my previous industry, I'm so nervous to present this talk. It does feel like a show where you can't really see the audience. So what is today about? So what I want to do is begin from a larger bird's eye view perspective, because digital transformation is really an approach. So sometimes we can focus so much on the granular nitty-gritty details that can lead us to really feel that there might be a one-size-fits-all solution, when in fact it's really the opposite that's true. So I'm just letting in, admitting in some more people. So in terms of housekeeping for today, what I'd love for you all is to pop your questions in the chat privately with your email addresses, and then we can really spend a lot of time getting back to every single one of you in a more in-depth way about your questions. And then the spin on that is that everyone who asks a question will then be entitled to a free consultation with Arora Online, so that we can help unpack your digital needs. And one lucky person or business will then win a 50% off discount from the service from Arora Online that best suits your needs. So in terms of the agenda for today, we're going to discuss what digital transformation is and get rid of any confusion around that. Then we're going to look at why it's important. Then we're going to look at the philosophy, or a particular philosophy of digital transformation that I feel resonates at this time. Then we're going to look at how one wants to begin approaching your digital transformation from a sort of bird's eye view perspective. Then some quick wins in the space to get you going on the first steps of your own digital transformation. And then, since e-commerce is really such a big space and is typically the first place that you want to start with your digital transformation in some way, shape, or form, I'll just look at demystifying that field and some sort of easy tips for you to get going in that space. So what is digital transformation? So there's a lot of confusion about what digital transformation actually means. So I'm going to use this example of the New York Times to hopefully clear that up. So digital transformation is really a journey through these different phases. So the first phase is digitization, and digitization essentially means taking something from analog to digital. So in the New York Times example, this means taking something that's analog, a newspaper, and creating the digital version of that. So it's mobile responsive, you can read it on various devices, and it's published in an online format that it's optimized for. So that's really the first point of a digital transformation journey. The second step is digitalization, and this means using digital technologies to improve your business models and your processes. So for the New York Times example, this means introducing a paywall, for example, after you've read 3 articles, and then creating content that is more optimized for digital, such as videos and podcasts that people really like to consume in the digital space. And then the final step of digital transformation, where you've kind of completed the journey, is where there is a coordinated change effort at scale throughout the business. And in the New York Times example, what this means is that they, for example, as a brand, are now a digital-first organization. So they barely rely on print, which is where they started from, and they're really associated and focused completely on being a digital business. So a digital transformation is really a logical progression through the above stages. And what I want for today, for you to think about, is to kind of try and start identifying where you and your business are in your digital transformation journey, and which aspects of digital transformation you may need to focus on in order to make the necessary progress in that journey that you want to make. So a big mistake that people make in terms of digital transformation is people see it as defining your digital strategy, when in fact it is defining your business strategy for the digital age. So with the New York Times example again, if they were just focused on defining their digital strategy, the question would be, how can we sell more newspapers using digital? And I'm sure you've realized that would essentially be the wrong question to be asking. Instead of just using digital to sell more newspapers, which would be a digital strategy, they really looked at how to become a digital brand that consumers want to engage with in this digital age. And that's what digital transformation is about. So why does digital transformation matter? Why should we care? Well, welcome to the Industrial Revolution 4.0. And as we know, we've been through various industrial revolutions before. In the late 1700s, there was the mechanical revolution, where we saw the mechanization of industry and the rise of factories, etc. Then in the late 1800s, there was the electrical revolution, which allowed us to mass produce things beyond just mechanical production. And then in the late 60s, early 70s, the internet obviously arrived and allowed a lot more automated production. And where we are today is an interesting space, because we're in this digital revolution where there really is this blur between the physical and the cyber or the digital. So people sometimes refer to that as the phygital. And the chief takeaway here is that the previous revolutions had a massive effect on industry, which then carried through to society. But they really, at their core, were about empowering corporations. Whereas this fourth industrial revolution, which is the digital revolution, really almost begins with the societal changes. It's the way that we're using technology to connect with people. If you think of social media and VR and AR, etc. And it's more that corporations and industry are responding to that and the needs of society. So it's much more focused on empowering people, which is why I say, like, to refer back to the Dickens example, there is this kind of democratizing pull of it all. And of course, COVID, as we know, seems to accelerate the urgency that we have around getting to grips with the digital revolution, because it really affects the ways that we consume content, the ways that we communicate, the ways that we work, the ways that we entertain ourselves. One of the other big reasons why we want to pay attention to the digital revolution is that it's really going to change the way that we work. I mean, I think we can all see currently that there is a big shift. We all know that COVID is going to make a lot of changes to the ways in which people work, even once a vaccine is found and we go back, we can potentially go back to more sort of traditional ways of working. There's going to be a big shift. So the University of Oxford came out with this graph that looks at the future of work and how the likelihood of different functions or different jobs being automated. So you can see at the top, you have things like telemarketers and loan officers, where there's a really, really high chance that they're going to be automated in the future. Whereas right down at the bottom, you have physicians and surgeons and nurses, where there's a lot of much more emotional intelligence required, where there's less likelihood. But there is the interesting thing to think about here is what jobs will be invented as we move forward and as we move further into this fourth industrial revolution. So it's really worth our time thinking about sort of thinking quite imaginatively about what jobs there will be in the future. Artificial therapists, work from home coordinators, virtual sound mixers for meetings like this. Imagine if my sound could be better, or was being mixed live. Voice UX designers. So as we do a lot more voice searches on our phones and our devices, there'll be people to design that user experience. Telehealth facilitators, which is already happening, but of course that will likely pick up a lot more. Chief purpose planners, because we're also discovering that businesses that have really strong purposes and that stand for something are obviously succeeding a lot more in this time, as that consumers care a lot more about the purpose of your business. Virtual events planners. So that's really something to pay attention to as we go forward. So why should we start thinking about that now? Well, one can have a reactive approach to the future of work and the future of industry. So, I mean, that's what a lot of people are facing right now with COVID. So people are thinking about, how can they pivot? Or is there suddenly a competitor in the space who's really eating up the digital space in your market? So that puts one in this sort of firefighting zone, which is quadrant 1 on the slide that you're looking at, where something is urgent and important and you have to do it now. And that's obviously hugely stressful and means that you sometimes can't attend to some of the other tasks that are really important to keeping your business going. So where we want to be is in quadrant 2, where we're looking ahead at things that are really important, like the future of work and how our businesses can digitally transform. But it's not urgent. So we can decide more when we want to do it. And that means that we can prepare ourselves and get ahead of the curve. So COVID has really shown us that people want convenience and seamless, delightful user experiences. such as the remote entertainment that they can enjoy at home. I mean, we've seen the rise of Netflix, which is really a digital solution. But over time, even as COVID becomes a thing of the past, more and more people will realize how they can enjoy the things online that they once enjoyed in person, like theater, buying and viewing art, ordering food, working in an office. And so businesses who really succeed at this time in capturing customers in those digital spaces will get a foothold as more and more consumers slide in that direction, from IRL in real life to URL online. So sure, some people, enjoy, I think most of us enjoy our in real life interactions perhaps more than we're enjoying the current moment, but you will lose market share as more and more consumers that they prefer doing a whole host of things online. And of course, the real benefit to all of this is that you can grow your customer base at scale online because you're exposing yourself to a much, much larger audience, many of whom might be more your customers than anyone in your business's immediate geographic location. So I mentioned this earlier about the rise of purpose as really mattering to people. And you can see these are a couple digitally transformed companies who've put purpose and the finding your why at the center of everything that they're doing. They've found a business strategy for the digital age. And for a lot of us, as we make this, take this step in digital transformation, there might be a reckoning of rediscovering that why. Like we said with the New York Times example, it might not necessarily be to just sell more newspapers. We might need to actually find a more distinct purpose in the world. And if you look at this slide, you can see that some of these brands like Uber, or we have the Trump quote there, are really have been strong disruptors in the past few years. And that's really because they managed to capture a really strong why that connected with people. So to go to the philosophy of digital transformation, which I believe really helps people succeed in that transformation, there's this fantastic triangulated approach, which looks at customers at the heart of your business, people as the soul, and by people here we're referring to your employees and your colleagues, and digital as the oxygen. So it's this digital first strategy and business model. So what does it mean to put customers at the heart? So this really means thinking not just about your customers, but like them. So what does it take to create a frictionless experience for them? How can we leverage customer data, this data that we have about our customers, to delight and surprise them, perhaps with new offerings or services that we can tell that they really want? How can we create a fan base around our customers? People as the soul, what does this mean? Well, here we're looking at how we can reward employees and colleagues for coming along with us on this transformation journey. Because a lot of the time, people will want to resist that. People want to avoid change, typically. And with people as the soul, it also looks at how we can bring in the feel of a startup, because that's really that agile feeling that we need to transform, but with the professionalism and slickness of the incumbent, by which we mean sort of more traditional businesses. So we need to remember people as the soul, because we might need to reward people for coming on this journey with us and celebrate them and ourselves. And digital as the oxygen, of course, means that you have very clearly defined your digital business model, and it is digital first. So why do some businesses succeed or sparkle as they approach their digital transformation and really take off? So the first point is that they spend a lot of time seeing and sensing. And this means that they are seeing the changes around them, like how the future of work is shifting. That's an example that we spoke about. And they're really thinking about the implications of those changes on their business. And they're also seeing and sensing digital economic and consumer trends and focusing on how that will affect their business. Then energizing and responding. This looks at, once we have identified those different changes and trends that are coming, we need to obviously take an energized response, not bury our heads in the sand, but be energized and say, okay, well, what can we actually do in our response to those things that we're seeing and sensing? And how can we put strategies in place to deal with those changes and benefit from them? And responding also means transforming yourself before you transform others. So it really begins within your business and what you can do right away. And the last thing here is balance that they get right, because you have to balance being able to still perform and fulfill your usual business functions while you transform. You can't give up one for the other. So in terms of these dualarity quadrants, which also help identify where your business and other businesses are in their digital transformation journey, you can see that there's, in the top right, we have the mature quadrant, where we have businesses who've been seeing and sensing a lot. They've got a lot of experience, they've got their eye on the future, they have the right strategies in place, they're high performing, and digital is a critical element in their strategy. And this has led to them having really loyal customers. The risk, of course, is complacency for these businesses, because why change? In the healthy quadrant, you have a lot of businesses who haven't perhaps seen everything yet. They're more kind of like startups, but they are definitely sensing the change and responding to that very quickly, and they're highly energized. Injured companies have seen a lot, but they're tired. They don't know how to deal with digital. They're surrounded with people who don't see opportunities, sort of yes but, no but people. And the scared quadrant is people who don't really want to look around. They don't want to think about it, and they don't want to change or respond. So to layer some well-known brands over that, in the scared quadrant, if we think of the history of Nokia for once, which we all had a Nokia at some point. So they were acquired by Microsoft, and Microsoft said, well, despite we can see the iPhone is taking off, but it's not going to take off hugely and change the world or anything, because no one's going to pay that amount of money for a phone, because it's just a product of productivity. It's not a lifestyle or entertainment choice. And of course they were wrong. So that didn't end too well. In the injured quadrant, we have businesses like Walmart, which is like our game or macro. And of course, they were injured by the rise and dominance of Amazon, which came along with this e-commerce solution that provided pretty much the same thing, but people could order it online and have things delivered, which really sort of ate into Walmart's market share. And they are making the recovery from that state through purchasing other companies so that they can innovate and offer similar e-commerce solutions to what Amazon was offering. And in the healthy quadrant, we have brands like Tesla, where they're seeing what's going around. They're really focused on the future, and they are totally okay with taking a lot of risks. And what we really want to do is be focusing, the ideal place to be is between the healthy and the mature quadrants. So one is still innovating and taking calculated risks, but also performing, which speaks to this balance between performing and transforming, so that you can deliver on your commitments, achieve operational excellence, but also have a belief in your future and be delivering on innovation excellence. So to build a future-proof organization, one must really embrace this handshake between the transformational mindset of a startup with the positives of the incumbent, which is the more traditional type of business. And the transformational mindset of the startup is really looking at disruption and innovation, and focused on that type of strategy. And the incumbent, the positives there that we still want to keep, are knowing how to run a business and perform. And this little chart makes light of how the one typically sees the other, with the incumbent seeing, startups of having VPs of hypes and directors of ambiguity. But that's just a little joke. So a really nice case study that I think brings to life this triangulation of digital as the oxygen, customer at the heart, and people as the soul is Lego. So Lego in 2004, it's hard to believe because of Lego's real dominance at the moment, and their success. But in 2004, they faced huge financial challenges and growth challenges. So they brought in a new CEO, and his mission was really to capture the minds and touch the hearts of both his employees as well as consumers. So he then spent a lot of time defining the purpose of Lego and what that meant. And he came up with, obviously not alone, but with his team, that the purpose of Lego is to inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow, the makers, the engineers. And that was a really important shift. So what did it mean in Lego's business to have people as the soul? So the first thing that the new CEO did was he really relaxed the old top-down management style that had existed in the business, where there was a lot of blame for people failing at certain tasks. And he scrapped that and said, the real failure is not asking for help or the team not giving help. So that really shifted the mindset and allowed people and really encouraged people a sort of flatter hierarchy and people to really collaborate to move the business forward. What did he do to get customers at the heart? Well, the first thing he did was found a way to enlist 120,000 volunteers who could then co-create the customer experience and brainstorm new product ranges with the Lego team. So he actually brought the customer inside that process. And that's why you can see things now that have resulted from that, because a lot of those volunteers were across a huge range of ages. So that's why we have things like Harry Potter Lego and Rolling Stones and Beatles Lego for the boomers. And yeah, it really led to this diversity of their products and the huge popularity that resulted in. And how did they achieve making digital as the oxygen of their business? Well, they connected their online and their offline worlds. So they created a VIP platform for members with ticketing services that people could sign up for to enjoy the world of Lego online. Of course, to achieve this kind of digital transformation, one needs transformational leadership, much like that Lego CEO, who obviously got a huge buy-in from both customers and employees. So these are just a lot of the principles of transformational leadership, which obviously, one needs to be the North Star in the business, knowing where you're going. You can't just be reactive. So that links back to that proactive point that we were speaking about. One has to inspire with action and authenticity. That speaks to the fact that we don't want to just outsource the digital transformation. We actually want to begin with ourselves, even as the leaders in the business. Not thinking about customers, but thinking like them. Field journalism, this really refers to people must see what you see. So sometimes you have to bring them evidence, a compelling purpose that we've spoken about, and a coalition of the willing. So it's typically not a hierarchical approach. Instead, we're asking people who wants to join what you're working on. And then, of course, being agile, which we'll get to in more detail later, is really this principle of failing and learning fast. So how do you begin a digital transformation journey? It can seem, very overwhelming, but these are the 7 steps that I think can help you identify, can work through a process, the high-level process, before you get into the nitty-gritty of what this all means for your business. So step number 1 is understanding where you are on your digital transformation journey. So at point number 1, are you digitally active? So do you have a digital presence? And especially, do you have e-commerce solutions to increase your revenue? Step number 2 on the journey is, are you digitally engaged? So are you using analytics and digital processes within your business? Are you then using the data that you're getting from digital to make strategic decisions? Are you digitally competitive is the next point. So are you using what you're looking at to forecast future needs and identify any gaps that there might be? Are you looking at how you can turn customer desires and their feedback into business solutions? And the final step is being digitally mature. So artificial intelligence solutions and that can drive what it means to extract value from digital. Can you create a channel agnostic customer journey, which means the experience that your business provides be the same on a phone, in store, on your website, and do they all resonate with the same brand messaging? And that final stage, obviously, where we're talking about AI and extracting value in that sense, is typically only really in the realm of the Googles, Amazons, and Facebooks, but it is worthwhile thinking about how we can create that that unified experience for the customer across all devices and platforms. The next step is to understand your organizational culture, because it's going to be very difficult to get buy-in from employees and colleagues and co-workers into the transformation if they're too afraid to fail fast, or if that's not the organizational culture that's being set up. So that's why in the Lego example, you know, the CEO really focused on reducing people's fear of failure and really set up a system that promoted people to collaborate, and that the only real failure is not asking for help or not providing help. So there are these different metaphors to understand organizations that it's useful to understand to try and understand your own organization and what might be holding your organization back in terms of taking the right steps toward digital transformation. So at the center in the red circle, you have this idea of wolf packs, where you know, people live in fear. There's very steep authority and command, and the weak are killed. So that's often like gangs. I hope none of you have businesses that are run in that way. The next stage is a sort of military metaphor for the organization, which is very much driven by control. And the organizing principle there is stability and hierarchy. And this we can see is often the case in schools and governments. Then we have the mechanical type of organization, where the focus is really on fine-tuning the mechanics to drive profits. So they're very focused on scorecards and you know, balancing scorecards. And that's typical of large corporations, public universities. Then in the green circle, we have organizations that really are about delighting customers and creating shared values between customers and employees. And there's much more stakeholder balance and a much more of a focus on the culture itself. And that would be organizations like Lego. And then the final circle is the teal organization, where there's much more a sense of being a self-managed organization. The decision-making is much more distributed between stakeholders, and there's a strong focus on purpose, because once that purpose is established, people tend to work much more at their maximum talents. So one might need to mix the above. It doesn't work in every business to go completely to distributed decision-making. But it is important to understand your organization in terms of these metaphors, so that you can identify where there might be blockages to digitally transforming. The third step is to look at your competitors and best practices in your field. So you want to look at your direct competitors, but also you can draw inspiration from those outside your lane, who might actually be doing really exciting things that can inspire you. Next, you need to really unpack your digital customer experience. So we know that the customer experience has replaced price as the ultimate differentiator between brands, which is really fascinating. And the key thing here to creating a positive customer experience is making your products or services easy and delightful and intuitive to use online. So what does that actually mean? So the first part of that is don't make me think. We all know this from being online. If we have to think about how to do something, how to make a booking or we have to go through too many steps, the forms are too long, it creates friction, and we typically leave, or we have a bad sense of that digital experience of that brand. And we're likely to avoid them in future, especially if there's an alternative where the experience is better. Part of getting to that point and creating this intuitive experience is thinking about the personas of your various customers. So once you really understand who your customers are and where they exist in the digital space, you can really think about all the different touch points where you can find them and meet them. And the final aspect of this is thinking about the ideal journey that you want your customers to go on with you. So what is the job to be done? How do you get them from A to Z in terms of the experience that you want to have with them? And you really want to outline and map that journey so that you can ensure that in all the systems that you're putting in place, getting them from your social media advertising to ultimately making a purchase, for example, at your online store, that you've really set up the ideal customer journey there. The fifth thing you need to look at is how ready is your business for agile development? So how quickly can you actually evolve and transform? So in terms of your internal readiness as a business, there are certain things that you're going to need to focus on. The first is having working software over comprehensive documentation. So do you have software that enables you to work as a team, or are you just really focused on documents that provide guidelines? Because if you are, you're going to need to shift away from that and focus much more on collaborative software. The next is embracing a mindset that says that one will respond to change rather than just stick rigidly to a plan. So that's really critical because we're going to be getting feedback from customers and we're going to be collaborating just like Lego collaborated with their customer base. And instead of just blindly sticking to the plan that we had laid out, we need to be open to responding to any changes to our strategies that might need to arise. And finally, internally, one has to stress individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So this typically means that, you know, where someone might share that they have some sort of idea and that might go against one's typical process and it might present a new tool to work with, one needs to allow for those voices to be heard and allow individuals to come to the fore rather than just, again, blindly focusing on what the existing processes and tools are. In terms of the external application then of agile development, at the core of the concept of agile development is this idea of rapid iteration. So we're getting feedback from customers and from our internal teams, and then we're rapidly iterating or pivoting to create something that is closer to what they want. And that is really key to agile development and digital transformation. Next is thinking of collaborating with your customers. We've spoken about that. And this means involving your users in the development of your product and services. So how can you bring them in as part of your test groups or your focus groups? And wherever possible, obviously right now it's not possible, but you can do it remotely over Zoom, is to be face-to-face with them so that you can get much shorter feedback loops so that you can iterate much more quickly. And then in terms of that agile development, how can you measure the success of that? Well, it's quite simple. Is the delivery of your products and services, is it on time? Are you deriving value from what you're doing? So is this iteration actually driving up your profits and giving your business more value? Are your customers satisfied and happy? And is the product of what you're putting out, is that quality good? And are you proud of where your products and services are at? The next thing to focus on and think about when thinking about digital transformation for your business is identifying the change that's coming. Because inherent in the concept of transformation is this idea that there is change. So you need to identify what those changes are going to be, or what they could potentially be. Then you need to develop a communications plan to communicate with your internal stakeholders around what changes are going to be made as part of this digital transformation journey. You then need to identify any anxiety around changes. Like we said earlier, people often avoid change. It stresses them out. They want to stick with the status quo. So you need to identify what those anxieties are. You then need to develop some sort of training program for everyone who will be affected by the change. And of course, if you can offer any sort of certificates, people love to be rewarded, especially when they're going on a journey that may potentially feel stressful or feel disruptive. Creating a mandate for change, or a change mandate, this is really critical, because sometimes one won't get the buy-in for change unless you really show people the benefits of modernizing and transforming versus the risks of not modernizing. And that can often create that buy-in with people. The 7th step is strategic planning. So Gary Hamel has this great quote that companies fail to create the future not because they fail to predict it, but because they fail to imagine it. It is creativity and curiosity that they lack, not perspicuity. And perspicuity means the sort of clearness of the vision. So in terms of the strategic planning, I like this quote because it highlights how strategy is really this intersection of logic. So, knowing where this is all going, we can see the future of work, we can see what's happening with the Industrial Revolution, and that's intersecting with creativity. So, which is that, what will my audience want and need? How can I use the skills that exist within my business in terms of our assets, my team, and how can we provide that and fill that gap that's going to exist? So to break strategic planning down into a few more steps, when one is thinking about it in terms of digital transformation, the first thing is to invest in the arc of the possible. So, what might happen if we take something if you think about your business and you think about, okay, well, augmented reality is definitely on the rise. If we think to the end of the rainbow about what that means for our business, what could that mean? And then really going down each of those paths. The next step is to think about how all of these changes that are coming can potentially impact your team, and for everyone to really consider that. The next is working with your customers. We know it's an era of customer centricity in which experience is the currency that is most critical. And when thinking about our customers, to go back a step, we want to focus on them as part of our strategic planning in 2 ways. So the first is, how can we brainstorm with them? How can we get them to share their insights, their impressions and their suggestions? What services or products would they like to see from your company? And then the second step is, how can you take that information from your customers and make modifications to your existing plans? So the next idea here is that we need to identify outgrowths of the current plan. So some ideas might be put on the shelf, but we might recognize that in the future, we might want to get back to them. So we want to sort of put some of the outgrowths of our brainstorming and all of this planning, put them on the back burner, but keep our finger on the pulse in case we can see things shifting where we want to pick that thread up again. And of course, refreshing the plan frequently is vital because, we've been talking about agile development and rapid iteration and not being too caught up in sticking vehemently to one plan because we need to be responsive. We need to respond to what's happening around us. So in terms of quick wins, in terms of digitization, which is that first step that we were speaking about, just as an entry point for some high-level ideas for how you can start digitizing. Obviously, there's the online shop concept. virtual tours and talks. How can you take people, if you're an estate agent, how can you give them a virtual tour? If you are a gallerist, how can you show them the art in the gallery setting in a virtual way? Webinars, how can you use that to build your database for future communications, position yourself as a thought leader? Ticketed online events, how can you create online events that you can ticket people for? How can you create online membership programs? So for X fee per month or per year, what will people get access to as a sort of a crate of products that they get to try every month that is then delivered to them? Or is it access to, you know, behind the scenes of, you know, whatever your business is? And then online rewards, how can we how can we reward people for using our online products and services? But as I said, we just have to remember that those are typically things in the first space of digitization, which is that first step. So once one has done that, we need to keep in mind that we need to shift through to digitalization. So how are we looking at our business models and processes and monetizing that? And then finally, how are we fully digitally transforming to become a digital first organization? So in terms of the quick wins, e-commerce is the first step that most businesses want to take or should take towards digital transformation. So it can seem like a scary space where there's lots and lots of options and we really don't know which direction to go. So I've done a lot of the research for you and worked on a lot of these platforms. So I thought just to cut through a lot of the noise when you're thinking about, oh, you know, I need an online shop to sell my services or products. This is the summary of my findings. So the four biggies out there are Wix e-commerce, Squarespace, Shopify, and WooCommerce, which is the solution from WordPress. So Wix is, it's very user-friendly, but it is glitchy. So you're going to have problems across when you want to preview your new online store across various devices. So I don't recommend. Squarespace is also problematic because it doesn't auto-save a lot of the changes that you're making. And you can only have one sub-navigation panel. The page speed is typically low. So, which is, you know, the primary thing that ruins a customer's experience. So also would say avoid. The other two, Shopify and WooCommerce, are really excellent solutions. And as I'm going to discuss now, it's really about thinking which meets your needs better. So Shopify is an all-in-one e-commerce platform. It makes it very easy for you to create an online store, accept payments, manage your inventory, all from a single platform without really having to worry about technical aspects of managing a website like web hosting, security, caching, etc. So I like to think of it as the Apple of e-commerce because it's pretty expensive, but it is less customizable and less flexible. So it gives you more of a solution that is predetermined for you, but it's very easy and delightful to use, much like an iPhone. So WooCommerce, on the other hand, is an open source e-commerce plugin built for WordPress. And WordPress, I'd say, is probably the most popular and most robust solution for template-based website builds. And the great thing about WooCommerce is that it allows you to leverage all of its open source plugins. So you can really customize every aspect of your store and easily build custom extensions as you go. So it's the Android or the Samsung. So it's cheaper and much more flexible. Like there's no restrictions, you know, in an app store, for instance, like with Apple. But it is a little bit harder to use and can cause more friction for you. And it also might offset the cost of Shopify in that you might end up actually needing to bring in a developer who's experienced in it to help you in certain circumstances. So the decision to really choose between both of these platforms depends on your needs and your skill level. and how much time you're willing to commit. So just to give a little bit more of an in-depth summary into how I chose to assess the different platforms. So based on cost, the payment methods that they offer, the scalability, which is how they allow your online shop to grow, the ease of use, and the integrations that they provide. So in terms of cost, WooCommerce is the winner because it is more low cost and it's open source. You can get plugins, many of which are free. Ease of use, Shopify is the winner, mostly because with WooCommerce, you need to manage and maintain the software yourself. That being said, millions of people around the world successfully manage their WooCommerce stores themselves. So with a slight learning curve, if you're willing to put in that time, it can be learned. In terms of payment methods, WooCommerce is the clear winner because it really allows you to use any payment plugin that you want. Integrations, obviously WooCommerce is also the winner. As I said, there's a lot of open source plugins that you can pull from. Scalability, Shopify enables you to just purchase a new plan as you want to scale up your shop with more products and services, have more users on your back end, etc. So it really it allows your online store to grow very, very seamlessly. Then when you have to think about the payment portal options for your online store, there are a variety to choose from. But at the end of the day, the Arora Online team definitely recommends DPO Paygate. It allows people to use PayPal so you can accept foreign payments. And for South African merchants, that means that you don't need to open a new bank account or do any additional web development like with some of the others. The next step with setting up your online store is you're going to want to choose the template, and you can buy, there are some free templates for WooCommerce, but for the others to get more beautiful and powerful templates, you might pay in the region of 490 Rand to get the template that you then populate. And you really want to think about the features that you'll need when you select your template. So, are you going to need blog integration in time? Does it, is it, how responsive is it? So you're going to really need to think about the factors that are important for your business. So as we talk about e-commerce, I think the main thing is that it's not something to be afraid of. So I just wanted to provide these top-line thoughts on demystifying e-commerce with some of the principles that I think can best guide you. So the first is that principle of don't make me think. So how can we reduce the cognitive load on the user and speed up their journey? So how can we point them to the next action is usually the best principle. So for instance, if people use your search bar and there are no results, we don't want to just leave them, that can be a point of friction. We don't want to leave them hanging there. We want to say, sorry, no results, but why don't you try this? So point them to the next solution. Typically with e-commerce, we're always going to be wanting to increase subscriptions and registrations because it's cheaper and much more effective, obviously, to email existing customers than to keep finding ways to recruit new customers. And in this process of getting people to subscribe and to register, we want to ensure that we're always emphasizing the benefits to the customer of doing so. So for example, we don't want to ask people to sign up for updates from Arora Online. Is not really an effective way to go because as the consumer is saying, I don't really care about your updates. Whereas if I'm saying, stay informed about all the online events near you, that might be a more compelling way to get people to sign up. The next principle is that we obviously want to get people to increase the items in their wish list and their bag. And how can we do that? Well, one of the most effective ways is to show people how close they are to free delivery. Next, we want to reduce failure frustration. So a lot of the time, and this goes for any digital product that you have, there might be something that your customers aren't able to do where we don't have results, for example, from the search bar, like I mentioned earlier. And we want to make the bad things small. So sorry, there are no products that match that search, and make the next action big. So, but why don't you try this category? It seems a good match for you. We also, to reduce that frustration, we don't want to require people to do anything. We want to ensure that we're asking them to do something with a nice please. So there is kind of a civility to all of this. So, instead of saying you're required to fill out this step, we want to say, please fill out this step as it will empower you to do X, or whatever the case may be. Next, we want to always ensure that any online store or platform imbues trust. And one of the simplest ways to do this is to reassure people with symbols and images of locks and shields. It seems quite silly, but psychologically it does put people at ease. And then on a more hardcore level, we want to reassure people that their information that they're providing won't be given to anyone else, that it's all stored securely, and that it is POPI, which is the Protection of Personal Information Act, compliant. Next, we want to ensure that people return to our platforms. So how can you entice them to return? By giving them a promo code once they check out, engaging with them on social, email, SMS, or WhatsApp. That's really the key principle. And then how can we build relationships? So this is very similar to, how do we develop a friend? And there's a lot of platforms. I think of Mr. Delivery as one that stands out in my mind, where the copy and the visuals create a sense of intimacy with me and warmth through the way that the copy is written and the look and feel of the platform. Finally, once you've gone through all of these ways of thinking, you're going to want to really put together a strategy that outlines the consumer journey through awareness to consideration to the purchase to the post-sale phase, and then how you can generate loyalty. So this is a really good blueprint to use to start tracking that. So how are you going to drive awareness of your online store through word of mouth? Is it going to be PR? Are you going to use search ads? Social media? Are you going to get people to watch videos, how-to videos? How will you drive people to your website? Then the consideration phase, how can you use remarketing? So that's specific tools like Facebook Pixel that allow people to, once someone has visited your online store, how are they then remarketed to across a host of platforms. So that's, for instance, like when I'm sure you've experienced this when you go to Superbalist or other sites, and then you look at a whole lot of products, and you're still thinking about what you want to buy. You go onto Facebook or Instagram, you see further ads that make you remember that you were considering that purchase. Then once people have made a purchase, how do you make them feel good about the purchase that they've made, and continue the relationship with them after the purchase? How can you then use the post-sale moment to continue that relationship? And then ultimately, how can you drive loyalty? So how can you turn people into your brand ambassadors? How can you get user-generated content to show how your product is making people happy, making their lives better, how they're enjoying your services? So finally, I obviously have to do the plug of Arora Online, because I hope that a lot of you have asked questions that we can then reply to you in a lot of detail. And perhaps these are some of the services that we offer. So when you do mail us, because I do want someone to win the 50% off one of our services, think about which services you think might suit your business best. And we will be only too happy to attend to that. So I hope that you have enjoyed today, our first webinar, and we look forward to chatting to you soon. And let us know if you would also like to have a free consultation to help unpack where you are in your digital transformation journey and how Arora Online can potentially assist you. Thank you so much for being here, and enjoy the rest of your day.